Hello, and welcome back to the School of Self-Worth. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Kelly Lyons. I met Kelly through an entrepreneur group, and I really love following her on TikTok and seeing what she is up to because she shares about a super powerful topic, binge eating and helping women eat normally. So, in this conversation, we dive deeper into what is the true cause behind binge eating and really how self worth is at play when you are feeling really challenged about the way that you eat. Kelly truly has done the work on this topic for herself and leads a powerful community where she shares more about how to bring yourself back through your belief systems and through different kinds of habits to start to eat in a way that really feels gratifying and normal and satisfying for you. So, if you are a high achieving woman ready to turn around your relationship with binge eating, this conversation is for you. Kelly, I am so glad you're here on School of Self Worth. Welcome.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited you're here. And so, for those of you listening, I have known Kelly more really just virtually. We have similar coaches, and I have followed her on TikTok where she has just grown a ton in the last few months. And it's been really fun to watch what you share and what you teach in particular. And so, just the little background about us and our connection. And I'm really excited to have you on School of Self Worth, Kelly, because I feel like the topic that you focus on in particular is around binge eating. And it's not a topic that is actually really in the culture a lot. And yet, obviously, it's a topic that is really interesting to people because you're just getting so many people who are curious about what you're sharing. And so I'm curious if you could just actually start there. Like, tell us a little bit about your story and how you arrived at a place where like binge eating was a thing for you, and then how you got to the place where you're at now.
Yeah, awesome, Nicole. Thank you. So, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. So, I am 34 right now, and I started my first diet when I want to say I was a senior in high school. And I just went down this path of diet obsession. And it was like every single thing that I did, all I wanted to do was lose weight. But with every diet that I did, I became more and more food obsessed. I became more and more like, I don't even use the term psychotic, but it was like I couldn't stop thinking about food. And the more I tried to control my food, the more out of control I was around it. And I immediately went down this black hole of like diet after diet. And then if I had something bad, then I immediately would feel guilty, have to eat everything in sight until I was going to start over again. And then I would start my diet over tomorrow. The problem was that cycle lasted over 12 years of my life. Absolutely crazy. And it wasn't until I stopped dieting and I healed my relationship with food that the binging stopped, the overeating stopped, the weight loss happened. And I finally got to a place where I could be normal around food and have a life where food wasn't the thing that controlled me. And now I eat like a normal person and I learn how to listen to my body and I am present in my life. And so now what I do is I help women all around the world finally get to that place who struggle with binge eating and overeating and food obsession and all those wonderful things that can come from dieting.
Well, I love what you're sharing about how dieting, you started dieting young. And I think pretty much all of us who live in the United States or in a Western culture, that occurred for us at some point too, like me too. And I never really started a real diet when I was younger, but I definitely went through phases of like, oh, like I should be eating less, or if I gained weight, I would cut back. But I totally relate to what you're sharing about how, especially when you do start to diet in some form, and I'm also including all the things that are any kind of restriction. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that is that something you would say, like any kind of restriction, like even a Whole30 or those things include some restriction. And I would get through the 30 days. And at the end, I would be like, I have to eat everything. And so I wasn't so much like everyday binge eating, but when I would do like a restriction, and could you share a little bit more, like what is it that causes that for us that we go into that kind of binge mode?
Yeah. So really binge eating can come from three different things. So one is restriction. So any type of, whether it's a diet or restriction, cutting calories, following food rules, basically where you feel like you're supposed to be doing something or eating a certain way, skipping meals, whatever. So the first way is from restriction. The second way is from an emotionally driven binge. So for example, let's say you've had certain experiences growing up. traumas, or just simply put, you don't know how to process or deal with your emotions. And let's say, your kids are driving you nuts, or you're in traffic, or your partner's driving you crazy, or something bad happens, or whatever it may be, not being able to name, identify, process, or like let those emotions pass through you, that can 100% lead to binge eating. And then the third way is just habitually driven. So if you are someone who, let's say, only sees your self-care or your me time at night on the couch, and you've been doing that every night for a really, really long ass time, and you've developed that habit, that's another way that binge eating can occur too.
So interesting. I was like, I relate to all three of those ways. Like, right?
Believe me, I did too. And you know what? It's very nuanced, because that can be from binging, but that can also just be type of overeating or stress eating or emotional eating, where I deal with all those different types of overeating and coping types. But when it comes to binge eating and overeating, they're very, very different.
Could you say a little bit more about that, the distinction between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big difference that I talk about with the people that I work with is binging. It's not so much about what you're eating. Yes, you are eating a very large quantity of food in a very short period of time, but the behavior around it is what usually constitute as binging. So for example, there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of guilt around it. It's usually done in a very fast and furious motion. It's not like where you're sitting on the couch having a little bit of popcorn and then maybe having some chips, then some grapes, then some ice cream in this slow, relaxing. It is this go, 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 must eat now. I must do this while no one's here and no one can see me. And then what really constitutes binging is the emotions that follow it, the shame, the guilt, the depression, the feeling of needing to make it up. Where as overeating, yes, you are going to eat past the point of fullness, but there really isn't that emotion or that secretive behavior around it, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I feel like the stress, it's like overeating is a little bit maybe more sometimes the stress eating
Yeah,
that can come up for
absolutely.
people. Because I feel like this happened for a lot of us during COVID and the pandemic, right? There was a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
stress eating. Yeah, a lot of overeating. Okay. So helpful for you to define those terms for us. And so then now I'm curious, just go back to your journey a bit. So you were on and off this like binge eating cycles and all this dieting for a long time. Where was the moment where you realized it was a problem? And then how long did it take you to actually do something about it?
Gosh, that is a really good question. I think one of the biggest things that when I kind of looked back, I would be, I don't want to say upset, but I would be jealous at looking at the way people ate normally. So, for example, I would go out to dinner with my friends, and my friends would be having like chicken parm or pasta or delicious pizza. And I would be like, okay, I need a grilled chicken salad, dressing on the side, no cheese and all, like, so I looked like that perfect healthy eater. But then I would go home and I would eat everything in sight when no one was around. And for me, that's when I realized like this, if I have this fear of eating foods I love in front of people, like that's an issue. And I think it was just the accumulation of that over and over, of having this persona of, wow, she is so healthy. She's always dieting. She's exercising 3 times a day, which is a whole problem in itself.
Mhm.
And then going home, and it's almost like living this double life. And that's when I realized it was a problem. How long it took me to fix? A very long time, Nicole. You know what? Because I was trying to fix it, quote unquote, all the wrong ways, right?
Mm.
I was fixing it by trying to have more willpower. I was fixing it by really getting my act together, like all those little things. Oh, I'm going to get back on track tomorrow. I'm going to be good tomorrow. And those things actually made it worse. So once I threw out like the rule book, which literally like the book of rules diet culture tells you to follow, and I said, you know what? Today for lunch, and I will never forget this, I said, I'm going to eat what I really want. And this was years ago at this point. And I went to my favorite Italian restaurant and I got tortellini with penne vodka sauce. And I said, I'm going to eat this. I'm going to eat this at a table. I'm going to eat this without guilt, without shame. I'm going to be present and I'm going to enjoy it. I can eat as much as I want and stop whenever I'm full. And I sat at the table and I ate it. And I was probably about halfway done. And I was like, you know what? I'm full. And Nicole, like, this sounds crazy to say. I immediately started crying because, like, it's almost like these tears of like, wow, I I am actually capable of eating like a normal person when I let myself eat. And then I was like, okay, I'm on to something. This is exactly what I need to be doing. And I just kept building on that over and over and over. And I think there's this idea that when you don't diet, you just throw caution to the wind and you eat everything in sight and you live off McDonald's and pizza and ice cream and cookies and all these things, when in reality, you will actually eat healthier than you ever have, because you no longer have those rules. You're no longer like suffocating and you're able to eat the pizza, the pasta, the ice cream, the cookies normally and in moderation. And once I realized that and I was able to put it to practice, my entire life changed.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, because I sometimes will overeat just because I feel like the food tastes so good. And then
Mm-hmm.
to just stop when you're like, oh, I'm full.
Yeah.
I'm good, right? And like it just, and it is like what you said. And I think sometimes that diet culture has really taught us that when you don't diet, you are going to gain so much weight and be a huge mess.
Yeah. Like if you don't measure your spinach or like weigh the amount of grapes that you're eating, that you're doomed for failure. And I think so, like, that may sound very extreme the way I'm saying that, but when people diet for so long and they try to have this perfect body or, look a certain way, it becomes so obsessive that they are terrified to not weigh their food or to not count calories, or terrified to not use my fitness pal or track, or and we don't realize that it completely consumes us.
Mm. Well, so, on this podcast, we talk a lot about self worth. And I'm curious for you, like, where did it tie in, even starting to diet? Like, where was your worthiness journey in connection and relationship to how much you were binge eating and then actually stopping it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I was so excited to come on this podcast, just talking about self-worth, because behind binging, there is so much guilt and shame. Those are actually the two biggest emotions that drive binging. So a lot of people, they don't have a sense of self-worth. And I say that through the people that I work with, but I also say that through my experience. And when I was dieting, my self-worth was the size of my jeans. My self-worth was the number on the scale. And that number on the scale determined what I was going to eat that day, what I was going to feel that day, the way I would speak to myself, the way I would let others treat me. So my self-worth was so external that, like, I didn't even know how to feel worthy. And you don't realize that. You don't realize it when you're in it. It's until you step back and you look back and you're like, wow, like, how did I ever live that way? Yeah, and that's yeah, it's crazy, and I'm so happy I'm not there anymore.
Well, can you talk about then how was that journey? Like you said, okay, I'm just going to eat normally.
Mhm.
And if you look back at the self worth piece, like what did you have? Like, how did you start to define your self worth outside of the size of your, like what size clothes you wear or whatever it is that you had going on?
Well, the biggest thing I feel as though when it comes to finding my self-worth was just knowing that I am worthy. I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of self-respect. When I look back at my relationships, and this is what I tell my members and everyone I work with, it's like, we are such compassionate, loving, kind people. If my best friend in the whole world ever came to me and said, Kel, I just binged. I hate the way I look. I just ate this. I'm fat. I'm a stuffed sausage. Like, I used to tell myself all these terrible things. What would I say to that person? I would never say, "Oh my gosh, you suck. You're worthless. You're all these things," right? I would have so much love, compassion, and kindness towards that person, and empathy. But then why can't I show that to myself? Why can't I relay that. Why do I beat myself up from what I eat and let that turn into a binge? And once I realized that I have to, and I don't want to say like treat others the way you want to be treated, but speak to myself the way if I was speaking to my best friend or a 5-year old or to my children. That is really, I feel like, such a game changer for so many people, because then we can take a look back and compare. And the way we speak to ourselves is awful. Nobody would ever want to be our friend, be our partner, anything to do with us if we were to repeat what we say to ourselves.
Absolutely. I love what you're sharing. Like when you really start to listen to that inner dialogue, right? And that's what's driving so much of like binge eating or any other challenges and stresses that we have. And I deal a lot with women who are really challenged around listening to their intuition, stepping into their purpose. And a lot of it is they're blocked because they're so stressed out and speaking to themselves so negatively, right? And so what you're sharing is really spot on for people. It's like, how do you start to really stop that conversation so that you can now make a different choice when you're eating, and then you're really seeing that your self-worth is not tied up into that. That's just actually food to nourish you, like food because you enjoy food to be, like you said. And I was like laugh when you say what a normal person. I was like, diet culture has warped us so much that I guess it isn't normal to just like eat pasta for dinner
Yeah.
for some
Like
people.
it's so funny because I remember saying I just want to eat normally, and people who work with me, they're like, I just want to eat like a normal person. And how sad is that? And I don't
Mm.
mean sad like, oh, what's wrong with them, but how sad has diet culture, like you said, warped us for that to be like on a pedestal. Like, oh, I just want to eat normally. Oh, I want to be able to have a bowl of ice cream after dinner and then be done. And it's and we don't recognize where that came from and what that came from. What is diet culture? Is these rules? Is this you are not enough unless you look a certain way? And that's the problem. And that's really why I started this business, because I want people to realize, like, hey, there is nothing wrong with you. We have just been taught the wrong stuff.
Totally. I love that. There is nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
Literally nothing wrong with you. Well, one of the things too, so let's speak a little bit more. Like you talked about willpower, and that really stood out to me because I think a lot of times when it comes to food and your body, we think it's just about willpower. And so, can you talk a little bit more about how it's not willpower is not actually related to what you're speaking to?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could talk about willpower all day because I feel like people always talk about it when they talk about food. But in reality, we use willpower all throughout our day, 24/7. I used willpower to make sure I came to the appointment that I set with you for this podcast, right? We
Mhm.
use willpower to make sure we get up on time. We use willpower to make sure we don't kill our kids. We use willpower to, make sure we don't snap at our boss or whatever. And we don't realize how much we use willpower. And what happens is we go throughout our day and our little finite thing of willpower, we chip away, chip away, chip away, and we don't even realize it. And
Mm.
then one thing happens that sets us off, and we immediately lose it for people that struggle with overeating, stress eating, binging. And we immediately say, what is wrong with me? I can't do anything right. I do this, this, and this, and this person still cuts me off, or I'm still late for this meeting. Like, F it, I'm gonna eat. And then the
Mm.
first thing we do is blame our willpower. But we don't even realize we used all of it leading up to that point. And
Oh.
we blame something that we have so much of. So in reality, we should be celebrating our willpower because we use it for everything, right? If no one had any willpower, people would just be running around like chickens without heads, not doing anything they said they were going to do, right? And I think a lot of times is we blame willpower when in reality there's nothing to blame. We just don't know how to trust our bodies because we've been listening to rules or trying to listen to food rules that don't serve us all day. We have no idea how to name and process and let these uncomfortable emotions pass because we've always been taught, you know, big kids don't cry. We've always been taught like to just walk it off, shake it off, whatever. And these things bubble up and they turn into these really, really disordered eating habits. That
Mm.
was a long thing.
No, I
That
loved
was
it.
very long winded, but yeah, it's I could talk about willpower all day.
I really liked what you shared about willpower because I also think about it. It's like, when you go to the store and they have all the things at the end because you've made so many decisions through the store. And then by the end, you've lost your willpower because you've had to make all these decisions. And then they put all the candy at the end. So then you just like buy it.
Yep. Oh, it's all that next to the magazines that are like lose
Right.
20 pounds in 3 days.
Totally. But I mean, I have read stories about that. Like grocery stores are specifically designed that way, right? To come in. And so that's why I don't even know all the tips for how you navigate grocery stores. But I'm curious for you then when people you say, okay, it's not really about willpower. What can people do to start to chip away at it a little bit? Be like, okay, it's not really about willpower. What is it? And like it, I know you were saying processing emotions, but like what is even one tiny thing people could start to do to say, oh, it's not that I have a lack of willpower. It's actually what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So before we even get into that, I think the first thing we have to do, and this is probably one of the most important parts, is having awareness of our thought patterns, right? Because we think one thing and we immediately go down that rabbit hole, right? Of negativity. So let's say, for example, we wake up and we say, oh my gosh, I look terrible. I'm so fat. My jeans don't fit, blah, blah, blah. And then all throughout the day, we're just repeating those things, or we are amping up anything that's inconvenient or anything maybe minor negative. It's becoming so much more because of the way we started off a day. We started with these patterns that are just building and building and building. So before we even talk about willpower, all I want people to do is practice awareness without judgment. What am I saying to myself, right? How is that making me feel? And then how is that leading me to the next negative thought? Because having awareness without judgment, that's stopping us going down the rabbit hole. If we're able to observe what we say rather than actually be in what we say, rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm so fat. It's okay. I just observe myself calling myself fat. What is something I can say instead? And it doesn't need to be this like overly positive, I'm beautiful, I'm perfect, because that's not believable either. But it can be something as simple as, hey, I may not like the way I look, but I deserve to treat myself with respect today. And just that neutral tone can stop that runaway train in its tracks. So I think even before we like get into that willpower, it's all about all that stuff that comes before it, which is our thoughts, the way we think, and the way we see ourselves.
Yes, which is like its own very long journey into like that conversation we're having with ourselves all day. And how do you start to put in like a gap and not actually just immediately believe it or think that it's true, whatever you're saying to yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's who is it? He's Doc Man. I don't even know how to pronounce his name on Instagram, and I absolutely love him. He says, you don't have to believe every stupid thing you think. And I think that is so beautiful and so true. And it's so, it is like we let our thoughts take over, and we don't realize that the stories that we tell ourselves, they're not ours. They're from what we were told growing up, the experiences we had growing up, where our parents and our caretakers, they had their own experiences. So it's this identity that we take on, and it didn't even come from us, and we have no idea how it even got there.
It's so true. I feel like that sometimes we're so automated in our brains. And like I taught yoga for many, many years. And like that's the whole process, right? It's like separating yourself from the thoughts that you have and getting grounded and present. And, it's a constant, right? It's like a never ending thing because it's going into all the trickling into all these areas, like especially food and how you think
Yeah,
about food. Well, I'd love
totally.
to switch topics a little bit because you're a mom. And how old are your kids? Can you share with us?
Yes, I have a son who is 3, and I have a daughter who just turned 1. So yeah, I got the little babies.
Littles. She's got littles. And so how do you so you healed yourself and really worked through all the binge eating. And then I'm sure that your children sometimes bring up the emotions and the stress and the other things that could cause you to want to do it. So how do you manage that for yourself? Like when you're feeling that stress or there's a lot or the kids are screaming or what's going on and the things that might make you want to binge eat. Like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, kids screaming, chaos, basically every day of my life. I think the biggest thing is just one, giving myself grace. And once you go through the process, you can actually feel like when the kids are screaming, when the house is chaos, you literally go through fight or flight. I can feel my heart racing. I can feel my hands sweating. I can feel this adrenaline pumping. And I have to practice calming myself, right? Don't, what is it? Don't wait for this, calm yourself in the storm to pass. There is this quote where it's like, you trying to weather the storm. It's no, I have to change myself internally. I have to calm myself, and then everything's going to be okay. So while that sounds a little like super positive, I really make sure to make time for the things that are important to me. I am extremely lucky. I am extremely privileged. My husband works from home, and yes, he is working all day. It's not easy by any means, but we schedule time where I can get in even a 15 to 20-minute workout, because for me, that gives me clarity. That gives me energy. That makes me a better mom, right? And sometimes I have to talk to my husband and say, hey, I need 5 minutes, and I will just go sit in a room with silence and stare at a ceiling. But really, the most important thing is just understanding that the urge to want to eat, to just comfort and push down those really uncomfortable feelings, all that's going to do is just make it louder, right? And then I am not strengthening that muscle of being able to calm myself. So something I really love to do is, it's called 478 technique. It is not mine, but it's a really, really great breathing pattern, excuse me, where you inhale for 4, hold for 7, and exhale slowly for 8. And what that actually does is help calm you, regulate your nervous system. And believe me, lately, Nicole, I catch myself doing that more times than I'd like to admit. But, and when it comes to the actual food portion, I really make sure that I'm eating what I like, because so many people that struggle with binging and emotional eating is they will go throughout their day following all the rules, right? They'll have the yogurt with berries that doesn't taste good at all. They'll have the steamed chicken and broccoli. They'll have the apple and half a tablespoon of peanut butter. And then when one thing goes wrong, they go for the Oreos, the ice cream, the pizza, and everything. When in reality, when you're incorporating foods that you love with foods that make you feel good and having that moderation, you don't have that food on a pedestal anymore. So when your day gets hard, you're not going to race and inhale as many Oreos as possible, right? It does take practice. It does take exposure therapy, but having that moderation comes from teaching yourself how to moderate.
That's so helpful that you just start to practice and bring it in so that you can actually just, like you said, eat normally. And you're eating things that you like, which is, it sounds like, is part of the key.
Yes. Oh, that's a huge part that is so often overlooked.
Yes. Well, I'm curious too, because when you were saying, is there ever moments, like when you're feeling super stressed and you're like, I know you have all these practices, and then there's still moments, because when we have these old habits, like there's sometimes like that little temptation. Is there any part of you that has to just so I'll just give an example, not related to food, but sometimes if I'm really stressed and I feel like I can't get over it, like I really want to get over it, sometimes I think about the cost of staying in that stress. Like that's one way that helps me get out of it. I'm like, okay, Nicole, the stress is so intense. Like you have to go do something. Like you have to go on a walk, or you have to go hug the dog. Like you have to go do something to feel better. Do you have those moments where like that binge eating sort of just like creeps into the back of your mind and it like still wants to like knock on the door and be like, go down this route, Kelly?
That's a really, really good question. Binge eating, no. But when it comes to like, have I overate before? 100%, because I'm normal and I'm human. Eating normally coincides with actually overeating at times, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really big component of understanding that part of being human, and part of being of eating well is that we want to step away from trying to be perfect. So I think that's so important too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you and I both work with people who are perfectionists, which is where a lot of that can come
Yes.
from, right?
Perfectionists, people pleasers, all those lovely things. Yes.
Right. Like just being hard on yourself and then continuing
Yeah.
to be hard on yourself. Well, I'm curious if you already gave us that like lovely breath tip. So what would be a tip for somebody who's maybe just starting to try to figure this out? Would it be focusing on your thoughts, like what would you give them as like the first thing to start to look at?
Yeah, I think the first thing is 100% focusing on your thoughts, because we don't even realize half the things we tell ourselves, right? And what we say. And if we start off our day talking down to ourselves, or stepping on a scale and not liking what we're seeing, or, you know, I don't know, just beating ourselves up if we had a piece of toast, or, a whole banana instead of a half, recognizing your thoughts and just asking in a non-judgmental way, is this actually helping me? Is this serving me? Because until we actually look at our patterns, we are not going to be able to break them. So that is probably the first and the most important step.
I love that. It is really that, like just starting to see and recognize your patterns, and then that's going to give you the
Yeah, and
freedom.
without judgment too. Everyone, we are all doing the best that we can. And like you said, we're perfectionists. We are so hard on ourselves. And all that does is perpetuate a future binge or a future episode where you're like, F this, I'm just going to eat everything in sight, because we're never going to be perfect. And you're setting yourselves up for failure. And unfortunately, that coping mechanism with people who struggle with binge eating is food.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like my brain is like so many thoughts here, Kelly, because I love what you share. And it is really thought provoking because I feel like there's a lot of different, I always think of it this way. There's like a lot of different avenues that our stress shows up. And food is definitely a big one for so many of us. And so it's like when you're looking to just how do you have just a healthy relationship with food, it's like anything. How do you have a healthy relationship with your body, and starting to really generate that for yourself? And that's what I really appreciate about what you share. It's like, well, how can you just have a relationship where it's like, well, I can eat that, and then
Mhm.
I can be done eating that. And that's fine. Like my husband and I made Rice Krispie treats yesterday. And I'm like, well, I can just have one.
That's amazing.
And
Yeah.
then
And
that's it, right? Like, but to have that really, but sometimes I look at them, I'm like, oh, I have to what, because it's like I could want to eat a bunch of them just because
yeah,
they taste good. And just like healthy relationship is like, I just have one.
yeah.
It's delicious.
And I, something that's so amazing with the people that I work with, they'll be like, wow, ice cream got freezer burn in the freezer, or, the chips went stale, where it's like back in the day, we would never be able to even have them in the house, or else we'd binge on them. So that just shows, and like, or being able to have Rice Krispies sit on the counter for a day or two, that shows a good, normal, healthy relationship with food. So that's what it's all
I love it.
about.
So I'm like, I don't want to eat my Rice Krispie treats. I love it. It's
Oh my gosh, you have to share with me next time. Those are the best.
so good. All right, Kelly. Well, let's do our rapid fire questions. Are you
Ooh, okay.
ready?
I'm ready. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Amazing. All right. The first one is, what is the last thing you watched on television?
Oh, we are currently watching The Bear on Hulu.
I've heard really good things about that. I don't have Hulu. So is it really good?
You know what? It's really, really good. It's a stressful show. I'm like all jacked up after I watch it, but no, it's really, really good. So
Okay, that's good. I
love
get all my TV tips on the show. Okay, amazing.
it.
And then what's on your nightstand?
Oh my gosh. A picture of my son, not of my daughter, because I am that person who does not update pictures in years. So just my son when he was 4 months old, and now he's 3.
Amazing. Okay, and then when was the last time you tried something new, and what was it?
Oh, I am actually reading a book by Joe Dispenza, and I just tried one of his meditation series, and that was about 30 minutes, 30 minutes before me and you had this chat. So,
Amazing. Which book of his are you reading?
Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I love personal development. I love self growth. I am a crappy meditator, so I'm trying to get better at it.
I know. I love that book. It's really, really
It's
insightful.
really great.
Awesome. Okay, and then the last one. What are your top three most used emojis on your phone?
The mind blown.
Mm,
I'm a big like not the cheers the champagne, like the party hat one.
yes.
Oh, and my absolute favorite, the melting face, because that is me all the time with the kids. I use that one way too much.
Somebody else on the show mentioned the melting face, and I had never used it. And then afterward, I started using it all the time because
You
I
know
love it.
what? It is applicable to everything. I live for the melting face. That's just me every day.
It's I know, totally. I was like, "Oh, yeah, melting face. It's awesome." Well, Kelly, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so I am mostly on Instagram and TikTok at Kelly L Wellness, and you can find my website at kellylwellness.com.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom. I'm sure there's some mind blown emojis after our conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This was amazing.